students, and welcome back to the video lecture series of web programming. Today's topic is HTML form. I am your instructor, Ms. Shruti Raval. So let us start with today's outline. The first thing that we are going to study is what is form in HTML. The next we will study all the different types of input types that are possible in a form. The next thing is Textarea tag, and the last is select tag in form. So let us jump to our first topic, that is form in HTML. Now many times you have seen that for example, if there is a registration page for user, so there are number of input elements through which the user can input something, right? The information of user can be inserted into either database or some sort of data manipulation. So for these type of outlook in HTML, form is available, that is form tag is available. So basically an HTML form is used to collect user input, and most probably this user input is sent to the server for form processing. Now for creating a form which will hold this user input, the main tag or the parent tag is form. Okay, so the first tag that you have to write is form tag. So you will have a parent form tag start and end form end tag, right? So this is just an example of a simple form wherein you have written a label, that is first name. You have a text box in which the user will enter some data. Here by default I have entered something. The next is again a label, and the next is a text box for last name, and there is a button, right? So basically this type of outlook, if you want in a web page, you have to write inside the form tag. Now the first thing that we are going to see are two different attributes of form tag, and the first attribute is method attribute. Now method attribute basically specifies how are you going to send this form data which is collected from user to the server. Okay, so you know that you are collecting the input from user and you want to send this input to server, right? So what is the method in which you are sending this data? So basically there are two methods that you are going to use. The first one is get method and the second one is post method. So these are the two methods which can be used. The first is get method. Now basically whenever you are using get method, it appends the form data into the URL in name and value pairs. Okay, so whatever URL is being passed, the request parameters are basically appended if you are using the get method. Okay, also there are certain constraints in get method. For example, there is a constraint for data, only 3000 character limit is possible for the length of URL. So you cannot exceed this length limit in get, right? So if you have longer data, you cannot use get method. Also never we use get method for sending sensitive data, because as we have discussed that the name value pairs appear inside the URL, right? So if you are able to view the sensitive data inside URL, that is not a good thing. So get method is not used for sending secure, or you can say sensitive data. So this was all about get method. You can see over here get method. So here I have written form, and in form I have used the method is equal to get. Now this is very mandatory that whenever you are writing the value of this method attribute, either you are writing get or post, both should be in capital letters. That is mandatory. So all the letters of this method value, that is get or post, should be in caps. Now here you can see that there is first name, last name, and there is a submit button. So whenever you are passing this data, right, through get method, what will happen, whatever values the user is entering, you can see over here, if you are using get method, it will be appended to the URL, and you can see the name value pairs in the URL, right? So you cannot pass the sensitive data. The next is post method. So if you are passing sensitive data, or you are passing data which is of larger length than 3000 characters, you can go for post data. Post method basically it appends data inside the message body, and it is not shown in the URL as it is shown in the get method. Okay. Also, form submission, if you are using form submission with post method, then it cannot be bookmarked, whereas if you are using get method, it can be bookmarked. Now here is an example of post method. The syntax is similar, but only the value of method attribute differs, right? So method is equal to get, that we have written in the previous example, whereas here we have written method is equal to post. Again, post you have to write in all letters capital. Also you can see that everything I have written is same, that is first name, last name and the submit button. Whatever user value the user is entering and clicking the submit button, in get you can see that thing, that is name value pair in the URL, whereas whenever you are using post data, it is invisible in the URL because the data is appended in the message body itself and not in the URL. Right. So this was the first attribute that you have to specify in the form tag, that was method. How do you want to send user input that you have taken from user to server, right? Now after how, the second attribute gives me answer of where do you want to send the data. So the second attribute is action attribute, and the action attribute actually specify that whatever form data you are collecting from user, where do you want to get it submitted, right? Because you will write this in HTML and if you want to submit it to some server, right? So there will be a whole server side language script that you have written in which you will get this input data and you are either inserting it in database or you are doing some sort of manipulation with the data and displaying it on the web page again, right? So that is upon the server side logic, whatever you want to implement. But the constraint is that you are sending this HTML taken data to server. So if there is a server side language involved, there will be a server side page which is actually taking this data. So action attribute specifies the name of the page where you want to send your data, right? So whenever I am writing anything in both this text box and clicking on the submit button, these data will be submitted to, yes, here you can see that here I have written the action attribute form action is equal to action underscore page dot php. So it means that my server side language which I am using for taking the data is PHP, and this input which I am taking from the HTML page is being submitted to which page? The page that I have written in the value of action attribute, that is action underscore page dot php, right? So yes, so this will be submitted in this page and you have to write the further logic in this PHP page. Okay. So these are the two attributes that you have to write along with form. Now let us study different elements of a form. The first is input element, and it is most commonly used element of form tag. So if you want to have any input element in form, what is the tag name? Input is the tag name, and input element can be displayed in many ways, right? But what is the actual thing on which the input element is dependent? It is dependent on its type attribute. So whatever type attributes value you are specifying, your input element will look in that particular type or in that particular way, that we will see in the example. But this is the basic syntax wherein you are writing the form tag, that is a start form tag, end form tag, and inside you are writing input element, that is input tag, and the attribute type, and whatever the value of type you are writing in the type is equal to attribute value, and the input element will be displayed according to the type attribute. Okay, now let us study what are the different type attribute values for input element in HTML. So these are some of the possible values of type attribute. The first one, you can see that input type is equal to text. So whenever you are specifying input type is equal to text, what will be displayed? A text box will be displayed in which user can enter any value. The next is input type is equal to radio. Whenever you are writing input type is equal to radio, yes, a radio button will be displayed. So if you want two radio buttons, here you can see that I have a radio button for male and female, right? If you want two radio buttons, you have to write this 2 times, right? Input type is equal to radio, input type is equal to radio. One input type is equal to radio will generate only one radio button, whereas two input type is equal to radio will generate 2 radio button, and so on. The next is input type is equal to checkbox. So here for radio, the outlook of the input element is a circle, whereas whenever you are writing input type is equal to checkbox, the outlook of the checkbox itself is a square, so small square. So here also you can see that there are 3 checkboxes. So you have to write input type is equal to checkbox 3 times. That will generate 3 checkbox. One time if you write the checkbox, it will generate only 1 checkbox, right? So what is the difference between radio button and checkbox? Obviously you know that you will use radio button when you want to select any one option from the available options that you have, whereas checkbox allows you to select multiple options, right? So in gender you can either be male or female, so you will use radio button in which you can compulsory select only one option, whereas if you are having something like hobby, you might have multiple hobbies, so you cannot give a user this radio button facility, right? There you have to give checkbox in which user is able to take on multiple hobbies, right? The next input type is submit. So basically input type is equal to submit will generate a submit button, and if the user clicks on the submit button, by default the form data will be submitted in the page that you have specified in the action attribute, right? For example, in the form tag in action attribute, I have specified the value shruti.php. Whenever I click on the submit button in my form page, what will happen? All the user data, all the input that you have collected from user, that will be submitted to shruti.php page by default, right? The next is simple button, right? So if you want to create a simple button, the syntax is input type is equal to button. So if you want to specify a button which is not a submit button, but instead you want to specify anything like, for example, create or delete, you want to do something like this, you have to write external logic on the click of this button, but you can specify this input type is equal to button for getting a button on your form. And the next is input type is equal to file. So here many times you can see that, for example, if you are applying for a job, they may be asking you to upload a resume, right? So you can see such file dialog boxes in which you are prompted to choose a file from your computer, okay? So if you want such a dialog, then you can use input type is equal to file, where it comes with this whole dialog in which you have a choose file and send button. So you can choose a file from your computer and upload, right? So these were the normal input type is equal to attribute values. The next thing that we are going to study is grouping in radio button. Now I have already told you that when will you use radio button and when will you use checkbox. If I want to select only one option, if I want the user to compulsory select only one option, then you are going to use radio button. But by default, if you write input type is equal to radio, it does not give me this facility that you can select only one radio button. You have to apply external grouping to the radio, then only you can select from the either options. Now how to create this grouping in radio button? So for example, if you want to create such a form where you have written what is your answer to the question, okay, so you have 3 options, yes, no or maybe, and you want the user to compulsory select only one option, right? So it means you are giving which input value? Input type is equal to radio. You also know that here there are 3 radio buttons, so you have to write input type is equal to radio 3 times. So here you can see for no also you have written input type is equal to radio, for yes also you have written input type is equal to radio, and for maybe also you have written input type is equal to radio. how can I group them? It means how is it possible that I may be able to select only one of them? By default, if you write input type is equal to radio, it will create 3 radio buttons, but you will be able to click every button from them, right? So for grouping the radios, the attribute is name. So you have to give the value of name attribute similar. So here you can see for all the 3 radio buttons, I have used the name attribute and I have given the same value for the name attributes, that is name is equal to ANS, name is equal to ANS and name is equal to ANS. Now by specifying name attribute value same for these 3 radio button, it indicates that these 3 radio buttons are for a particular group and the user can select only one of these 3 radio buttons. Now it is a possibility that during your form creation, you might have another group of the radio button which you want to take input from user, right? So for another group, what you will do, for example, for another group like gender, apart from this group, you have a gender group in which you want male or female, right? So what you will do, there you will give different name attributes to that particular group of radio buttons. Okay, so in short, if you want to group radio button in one group such that user may select only one radio button, the key is your name attributes value for that particular group's radio buttons should be same. Okay, the next thing is text area in HTML. Now we have studied about input and input element and type attribute values for input element. The tag that we are going to learn is text area. Now text area basically defines a multi-line text input control. So there are some cases in which you are collecting user inputs like comments, reviews, right? So whenever you have multi-line text input, then you can use text area, because a normal text box will have limited space to write the whole content in it. So if you want a bigger text box with larger height and width, instead of going for input type is equal to text, you can go for text area tag. Okay, now text area tag holds an unlimited number of characters and the text renders within a fixed font. Basically the courier is used for the font that is displayed. Now the size of the area, that is the size of the text area, basically is specified in the code itself. It means you are specifying the number of rows and number of columns for your particular text area. So the whatever number of rows you are specifying and whatever number of columns you are specifying, according to that your text area text box will get displayed. Okay, so see, this is the code for text area. Here you can see that this is the code for text area, right? So you have the text area tag, then you are specifying rows and calls attribute, and the value is rows is equal to 4 and calls is equal to 15. So I want 4 rows and 50 columns, right? And I have written name for that particular text area. Inside the text area, I have written enter text here, and text area I have completed, right? So here you can see that this is 4 rows and 50 columns. So this is the middle portion that you can see enter text here. That is the actual text area. That is different from the text box that you can see besides your name. Okay, so this was about text area. So whatever height and width you want to give, that is specified by the rows and column number that you are specifying in the text area. The major thing that you need to understand in text area is to be started and it is to be completed. Input element was an element. If you don't complete input explicitly as an end tag, it was okay, that was a standalone tag. Whereas text area, if you start text area, you must have an matching text area completion. That is very important, otherwise the outlook of text area will be different. The next or the last tag of HTML that we are going to study here is select tag. Now many times in our input we want some sort of drop down menu right? So whenever you want drop down menu, you will use select tag, and the name attribute is very much needed to reference the form data after the form is submitted. Because if you omit the name attribute, what will happen? No data from the drop down list will be submitted. So name attribute is very important while you are writing select tag. Next is ID attribute, also you can associate it. But for creating the drop down list items, what is the child tag? The parent tag is select start and select close. Inside a select, whatever items you want to be displayed in the drop down menu, that has to be written inside individual option tag, right? So for example, I want 3 items to be displayed in the drop down menu. So I will have a parent select tag, and I will have 3 option tags in which individually I will write the items that I want to get displayed. Okay, so let us see an example of select tag. Here you can see the whole example of form, wherein I have written the form tag start and form tag complete. Also I have written the action attribute and its value. So what does action attribute do? Exactly, if I click on the submit button, all the values that I have taken from the user is submitted to this page, right? Inside you can say the form, I have written a label. Label tag is just for displaying the text on your form, right? So I have written choose a car, that is my label. After label, you can see that there is a select tag that I have written. So there is a select parent tag and starting tag, and it has a matching ending tag. Now in select tag, you can see I have specified 2 attributes, name and ID. You can skip ID, but you have to write the name attribute value. Then only the form data will be submitted to the server. The next, inside the select tag, I have various options. So you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 option tag written, and this also is very important. You have started option tag, you have completed option tag. In between, whatever text you write, right, that text will be displayed on your drop down menu. But when you select any particular value from the drop down and you click on submit, the data that is submitted is not the data that you have written between the start tag and end tag. That is actually the value of value attribute in your option tag. So for example, if you have a drop down menu, here you can see that I have this drop down menu wherein Volvo, Saab, Opel and Audi, that is written. Okay, so for example, I am selecting Volvo. So these thing that is displayed is basically written over here. That is start tag and end tags, in between text, that is displayed over here. But if I click on Volvo and click on submit button on form, what is the value that is going to be submitted? That is not the value that you have written inside this start tag and end tag. That is the value of the value attribute. So it is very important to write value attribute along with every option tag. Okay, so and the last thing in select tag is opt group. Now whenever you want that in drop down list also, there are different categories in which you have divided the options. You can go for opt group. The syntax for opt group is, you can see that I have created 2 opt group. The opt group, first opt group's label is here you can see I have created 2 categories for opt group. The first opt group's label is Swedish car and the second opt group label is German cars. So how it will look exactly? This is the way it will look. The first opt group category will be displayed in bold letters. You may not be able to click that label, but you will be able to click inside items of that opt group. And second category was German car. That German car label will be displayed and the cars below that, that is the option below that, will be displayed. So if you have such categorization and if you want to display such categorization in a drop down menu, you can use different opt group. So the parent tag will be select, inside that there will be opt group, and inside the opt group you will have different options. Okay, so this was all about select tag, and HTML form, and this was all about today's lecture. Thank you.